Hi, welcome to Constitutional Chats, hosted by me, Janine Turner,
and Cathy Gillespie,
with students
Dakare, Chatman,
and me, Tova, Kaplan.
Join us as we discuss hot topic issues with constitutional experts. It's sponsored by Constituting America. Well, hi, my name is Janine Turner. Welcome to Constitutional Chats, where we have a hot topic and we talk about that hot topic with a constitutional expert. So I'm with you. I am the host, one of the hosts, Janine Turner, and I'm the founder and co-president of Constituting America. And my other co-host is Cathy Gillespie, along with students Tova Kaplan and Dakare, Chatman. And our special guest tonight, and it's going to be great, is Dr. What is it, a doctor? I call you a doctor. Paul Isreal, yay! So I'm going to very quickly tell you about everybody. And tonight our hot topic is Thomas Edison. And Paul Isreal has so many amazing things to say. Okay, so here we go. As you know, I'm an actress. I'm the founder and co-president of Constituting America. Cathy Gillespie is the co-president of Constituting America, and she's one of the 16 private citizens serving on the very, very prestigious U.S. Semi-Quincentennial Commission when they are helping to organize the celebration of our country's 250th birthday in 2026. Say hello, Cathy Gillespie.
Hi, everybody. We're glad you're here.
All righty. Now, Tova Kaplan is 16 years old and lives in Chicago, Illinois. She currently serves as our National Youth Director for Constituting America, and she's brilliant at it, I might add, truly. She runs the National Youth Advisory Council, and she is a 3-time winner of our We the Future contest. Please check out our contest. Great things for kids to do during the summertime. She won first, Left Brain, Right Brain, for entrepreneurial, where she created a marketing plan. Then she won PSA, Know Your Rights, Read the Constitution. She was her 60-second commercial. And then she won for STEM, where she created an app. So she is just a delight. Wait till you see her tonight. She is passionate about educating and empowering young people to use their constitutional rights. Say hello, Tova Kaplan.
Hi, everyone. I'm especially excited to be here because you guys don't know this, but I went to Thomas Edison Elementary School, so I can't wait to learn about the man behind the legend.
Oh, that's so cool. I had no idea. Wow, well, that's going to be great. Okay, I know Mr. Isreal just got very excited about that. Okay, Dakare Chatman is our Constituting America ambassador. He as well is 16 years old. He's currently a junior full-time college student in South Carolina. He has won Constituting America's We the Future contest. Check it out at constitutingamerica.org twice. Once for Best PSA, where he reminded viewers the Constitution is an American thing, so know it. And he currently stars in billboards for Constituting America all across our road map of America. And he also won for a short film, Man on the Street. All of these can be seen at constitutingamerica.org. He's also actively involved in our National Youth Advisory Board, and he's a working actor, seen most recently in HBO's The Righteous Gemstones and in Netflix Outer Banks, just out 2 weeks ago. Dakare wishes to be an actor, but also a politician, but says you must be an actor to be a politician. Say hello, Dakare Chatman.
Hello, everyone. I did not go to Thomas Edison Elementary School, but I'm an actor, and I did watch the movie last night, and it was phenomenal. So can't wait to hear what Dr. Isreal has to say.
Okay, very quickly before I get to our special guest and expert, I want to give a shout out to Lisa Williams, who's our Director of Communications and puts all this together. Say hello, Lisa.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming.
And Jeanette Kranak, who's Director of Operations, who books all of these constitutional chats as well as all of our private and public chats into the school. If you'd like to book a speech, Jeanette Cranack is the person to know. And you can hit the little book of speech button at constitutingamerica.org under our George Washington Speakers Initiative. Say hello, Ms. Cranack.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here tonight, and I hope to hear from you soon, and we'll come and speak to your group or school.
That's right. That's right. Okay, so now drum roll, please. Our special guest of the evening is research. It is Dr. Paul Isreal. Geez, I thought I'd seen that. Now I see it for sure. Dr. Paul Isreal. Let's see here. He is a research professor, director, and general editor of Thomas A. Edison Papers Project. He's a historian. Dr. Paul Isreal, a former Californian, moved east to New Jersey over 30 years ago to do research for a book on Thomas Edison and the electric light. Today, he is the director and general editor of the Thomas A. Edison Papers at Rutgers University, the New Jersey State University. The Thomas A. Edison Papers Project, a research center at Rutgers School of Arts and Sciences, is one of the most ambitious editing projects ever undertaken by an American university. As director of the papers of Thomas A. Edison, Dr. Isreal is one of the foremost historians on the life of Thomas Alva Edison. Dr. Isreal is chief editor of the Papers of Thomas A. Edison, Volume 8, New Beginnings, January 1885 through December 1887, Johns Hopkins University Press, 2015. And Dr. Isreal's book, Edison, A Life of Invention, is available on Amazon. Ooh, you got to get that. Edison, A Life of Invention. Dr. Isreal has been featured on PBS series, History Detectives, discussing Edison's brilliance. I'm currently reading a biography on Edison, and I'm just in awe of him. But I'm in awe of you too, Dr. Isreal, because that's quite the resume. And we just discovered as well that you were a consultant on the current wars with Benedict Cumberbatch. So, wow.
Well,
Welcome
thank you.
to the show.
Thank you. I realize that little bio that you read is a little outdated. It's now 40 years since I moved from California. Hard to believe.
Woo! Oh my goodness. Do you miss California at all?
Yes, I do. But you know, New Jersey has really become home. So I enjoy being here. So, yeah.
So, Dr. Paul Isreal, you know, Thomas Edison was, I'm astounded at the creations and the inventions. I'm just astounded. And I think the American people don't really know. I mean, they know the light bulb and this and that, but I'm so glad that you're there carrying on his legacy, because, and I'm glad we're doing this tonight, because I think people really need to know how brilliant he was. All the things he did that we don't even, from batteries to, you know, crank the starts of the car, and not to mention the light bulb and the phonograph and motion pictures. Do you know, I'm an actress. I moved out to Hollywood at 17. I've been acting, you know, how many years in my life now. I never knew Thomas Edison developed, you know, the until I saw it recently at the Smithsonian or somewhere in DC. I wasn't even aware of that. I'm surprised there's not like the Edison movie studio. There really should be an Edison studio. Anyway, I know there used to be. So well, I'm going to turn it over to you, because I know you have a presentation for us, and we're going to start with that. So, okay. Dr. Paul Isreal, I'm turning it over to you for a moment.
Okay, good. Let me get my PowerPoint here and get started. Okay, so I'm going to mostly talk about the patent system, but we can also talk a little bit about other aspects of intellectual property. Since the Constitution is the main theme of this, this series, what I want to do is start, of course, with the Constitution and the Patent and Copyright Clause to promote the progress of science and useful arts by securing for limited times to authors and inventors the exclusive right to their respective writings and discoveries. And Edison, of course, was a prolific patenter. During his lifetime, 1,093 patents. And until the beginning of the 21st century, nobody had surpassed Edison in the number of patents. And so part of what I want to talk about today is how the patent system was an essential part of Edison's work And he also influenced how the patent system changed. So the National Archive many years ago set out a list of 100 milestone documents, and not surprisingly, the Declaration, Constitution, Bill of Rights, all sorts of documents that we associate with the United States. And one of those was the Edison electric lamp patent, his most famous patent. But that was just one of 424 patents that Edison took out related to electric light and power. If you total that up, there's a few more than 1,093 because some of them fall in more than one category. But you can see that electric light and power, this is an industry that Edison started. Phonographs and sound recording, another industry that Edison started. And there are lots of patents in both of those. Motion pictures, there's only 9. Well, he had the key patent on the camera, and he had a few other, significant patents, but it was really the camera that was the key to that. But, and this is something I'll bring up at the very end, the way motion pictures were first produced was directly related to the patent system, and so we can talk about that. Edison began as a telegraph and telephone inventor, so telecommunications. Batteries were used in all sorts of technologies, and Edison worked on electric batteries for automobiles. The first decade of the 20th century, he was trying to do what we're still trying to accomplish, the best battery to power electric automobiles. He was involved in the chemical industry, cement mining, miscellaneous technologies, office, and so forth. The other thing that he invented, besides industries and major technologies, was the research and development laboratory. And this is one of the things that made Edison so successful. The sort of image of the inventive genius here with his improved phonograph really doesn't represent Edison as well as this picture with the staff of his West Orange laboratory. These are all the research staff at that laboratory. Here's Edison in the middle of the picture. He's most famous for his Menlo Park laboratory. This building here in the middle on the lower left is the original wooden laboratory building. When he began working on electric light and power, he got funds that enabled him to expand that laboratory. And over here you can even see the electric railway experimented with. This over here on the right is his West Orange laboratory. So this is 1876 when Menlo Park is established. It grew in 79 and 80. 1887, he built this huge new laboratory on a much grander scale. There was nothing like it in the world when he created it. How did he fund these laboratories? They were very expensive. So Menlo Park cost about $40,000 to build and equip. He funded it because he had patents to sell. He became a telegraph inventor. Western Union and other telegraph companies purchased the rights to his patents. They hired him as contract inventors. They paid him royalties. One of the competitors of Western Union was a company run by Jay Gould, a notorious railroad financier. And he actually acquired a patent that Edison also presumably had done for Western Union, and there was a battle over who would control that patent. But Edison got a lot of money out of it and was able to build this laboratory. In 1876, he was trying to fund its daily operation. He wanted a new contract with Western Union. Another patent, Alexander Graham Bell's telephone, had emerged as a competing technology to the telegraph, and Western Union was willing to give Edison $100 a week for his laboratory as part of this new contract, as well as paying royalties and purchasing any patents that he created at his new laboratory. Coming out of that, he developed the carbon transmitter that made the telephone actually a practical instrument, and they also invented the phonograph. So by 1878, when he began to think about working on this technology of electric light and power, the Western Union investors, including the firm of Drexel Morgan and Company, yes, that's J.P. Morgan, were willing to put $130,000 in his hands over a period of about 2.5 years. It's about $3 million in today's money for just research and development. And what they were purchasing from him, again, were the patent rights, right? So the patent system was crucial to Edison's success as an inventor and to the success of the companies he created. They were responding to the newspaper articles that appeared in September of 1878, where Edison laid out how he was going to replicate the gas light system in New York City with electric light system. And Edison lays out all the ways in which he's going to basically replicate with electricity what already existed in gas lighting. There had been people working on electric lamp patents for 40 years before Edison. So he wasn't starting from scratch, but he was starting with a different idea in mind. He was going to build a lamp that fit into a system. So he's going to design the system, and out of that, he would develop his electric lamp. By the October of 1879, he had a lamp and generator. In 1880, they spent the year developing all the parts of the system: lights, sockets, fixtures, meters, safety fuses, underground conductors, distribution systems, and generators. And he had a team of people working. Team research really begins at the Edison laboratory. However, Edison's assistants understood they were working on his ideas, because it was a settled rule of law that when a suggestion came from an employee on an invention that had been conceived by the employer, that the idea, unless it was completely new method or arrangement, would actually be the property of the employer and part of the employer's patent. And Edison even told one of his researchers, I do not pay you to make suggestions to me. How do you know? But I already have that idea. Now, if I use it, you will think you took it from me, right? So Edison was going to be the inventor at Menlo Park. But creating an electric light system was really complex. So in 1879 and 1880, you can see that he's at Menlo Park. There are a lot of patents being taken out, about 75 of them related to the electric light and power system. And then 1881, 82, and 83, he begins to move out of the laboratory and into commercial production of electrical machinery, electric lamps, setting up the Pearl Street Station and then other central stations in the United States and Europe, and also individual plants for buildings. So anything from a hotel to a textile mill to a steamship could have its own electric light system. And Edison came, or developed, I should say, in 79 and 80, what we would today call basic patents, the 8 or 9 kind of fundamental parts of the system and the patents that protected them, which he felt would give him a monopoly over the electrical business. But as they went into commercial use, there were all sorts of minor problems that needed to be taken care of, improvements that needed to be made, make the system work more efficiently, drive down the cost of lamp manufacture, and so forth. And so he actually took out more patents in those periods, the patents that he thought were more valuable than those that secured the science or the basic thing. These were what he considered commercial patents, right? And one of the things that changes is his patent practices, right? So instead of, Edison being the inventor, he now began to encourage his employee to work up patents on ideas that they had, but he still didn't want them taking the broad patent that covered the principle of the thing. Those were the ones he still applied for, right? In order to regulate the royalty that we paid to the patentees. Edison was in fact becoming the corporation that employed the inventors, right? And this changed how he rewarded them as well. So in the 1870s, 1880s, and 1890s, increasingly he went from giving percentages of royalties or cash rewards or even management role in companies, increasingly allowing them to take out patents for improvements, but not the principle. And then in the 20th century, with his much larger laboratory at West Orange, increasingly the lab staff were encouraged to develop their own ideas and their own patents, right? He also began to hire outside inventors that he had never done before and purchase patents from the outside, increasingly trying to protect not just his inventions, but strengthen the patent portfolios of his companies, right, to protect the industry. And this became especially important in 1911 when he brought all of his businesses together into a single company, Thomas Edison Incorporated. So the growth of corporate R&D is the thing that Edison started and grew enormously in the 20s and 30s. Edison dies in 1931. You can see the growth of laboratories and researchers. This is what Edison began, and it affected the patent system. They had to figure out what it meant for corporations to fundamentally be the places that funded R&D work and patenting. So there was this court case heard, the Flash of Genius case, and one of the things that happens is that the appellate court rules that there is no invention without inventive genius. That is the flash of genius. This principle simply emphasizes the importance of individual achievement, which is the aim of the patent law. And they urge that if the corporation patents funded by corporate research organizations were going to be allowed, that this should be a change in the patent law. Well, one of the things they were doing was drawing on a vision of Edison that had emerged at the time of his death. He had been retired as an active inventor. The role of his laboratories had sort of been forgotten. He was seen as the last of the great heroic inventors, you know, with willful and unrestrained as poets, right? The future was that of the organized, highly trained physicists and chemists of the corporation research laboratory. And in fact, the appellate court even described its advantages, right? Taught us how to invent, routine experimentation can produce results beyond the imagination of 20 years ago. Such contributions are more often than not the step-by-step progress of an entire group, not the achievement of an individual. Such an advance is the product not of inventive ability, but of the financial resources and organizing ability of those who operate the laboratories. Essentially, they were describing what Edison had done in the late 19th century and the early 20th century, but that had now become part of the routine of American industry. So I'm going to leave it there, but I want to just raise a few other issues for us to think about. So patent infringements are really important. This is particularly true in the electric light company. The formation of General Electric, its competition with Westinghouse, their attempt to figure out how to balance the patents between them, the antitrust law and its effect on patents. So the Motion Picture Patents Company is really important. If you want to know more about Edison's work in motion pictures, there's a good place to start. Edison's last research project was finding an alternative source of plants that could produce latex to produce rubber for the auto industry in case there was another world war. And so he was one of the advocates for the Plant Patent Act of 1930, right, which is the first time that an organism could be patented. Today we patent all sorts of organisms. International patent system evolved from the 1880s to the present, and then copyright motion pictures and sound recordings, another thing that Edison was involved with. And we can talk about that if you're interested. So let me stop sharing and we can go on to discussion.
Well, thank you. That was amazing. I have so many questions for you. Okay, my first question though is personal for you. You have dedicated so much of your life to Thomas Edison. Why? Why have you done that?
Well, I didn't intend to. Actually, when I came from California, I came for what I thought would be 6 months. I was actually working on a study. So 79 was the 100th anniversary of the electric light. That's when the Papers Project was founded, and the Thomas Edison National Historical Park in West Orange, which is where the archive of about 5 million pages is located. I had funded a project to study how Edison invented the electric light. I came out as a research assistant on that project and became co-author of the book that came out of it, Edison's Electric Light. And then I went to work for the Edison Papers. I had a master's degree in public history, and I went back, got my PhD at Rutgers, and continued to work for the project and took over as director in 2002. It was not intended, but as I began to work on this fascinating man, and there was so much there. The archive is so rich. And Edison didn't just do one thing, right? He wasn't like Henry Ford. Henry Ford did automobiles. No, Edison did all sorts of things. And so you're constantly discovering and having to understand all sorts of different industries and technologies. And Edison was such an important cultural figure that that's also a really important part of studying him.
You know, I'm going to throw out just some basic things because I want to turn it over to Tova and Dakare and Cathy as well. But, you know, I've been reading up about him, and it's interesting what you just said, which was how brilliant he was in so many areas. And he was even a great CEO of his company. I mean, he was really in charge of what was going on. People might have disagreed with what he was doing, but he was pretty savvy in so many ways. But he was deaf, primarily. Most, you know, and people don't know if they really know how deaf he was, and he rarely slept. And it's interesting to me because as a child, the teacher said they thought his mind was addled, you know, and here he turned out to be this brilliant man who was just always exploding with thoughts and ideas and thoughts and ideas and thoughts and ideas. And I've been struck with he was very obsessed with his phonograph. And for those that are younger, that's the record player, you know. But he couldn't hear, so he'd have to put his ear up, you know, to try to hear all the, but even like Beethoven, even though that he was so deaf, I think there was one recording that was so good, because he kept saying he wanted the recordings to be better and better and better and better and better, you know, and he was a little obsessed with it. And it was so good that they went on a tour, and they would have the opera singer sing live behind a curtain, and then they play his recording, and they couldn't tell the difference. I thought that was really fascinating as well. But he couldn't hear, and there's this great sort of story that Montessori, the woman who I guess started the Montessori school, witnessed him actually go up and bite the instrument, the piano, because when he bit it, it would resonate in his, you know, in his cavities, and he could hear then. So this was a man that I think was just, people don't understand. It's always Einstein, you know. It's like Edison, all the things that he did, and he was just, I mean, and he rarely slept. And it's that kind of energy today that I think people hinder. They want to stop that energy. They think they need to calm that energy down, especially in children. And yet they didn't do that to kids back then. And thank goodness they didn't, because look at how he you know, turned out to be. So I guess if I have to ask you a question, you know, I just think it's the man in general and so then I can move on to everybody else. But wasn't he extraordinary just as a person? And also from an acting point of view, it is interesting to me that he had all the patents originally, that all the movies had to go through him. And then I think there was a lawsuit on that. And all the movie people did not want to have to do their patent, but he was trying to control all the patents with the movie industry. So that'd be interesting to talk about that whole patent situation. My mind is on fire right here with him because it's just so much going on. I forget where I was going with that, but he, yeah. So he did have that patent that was challenged, right, with the movie industry, because he tried to hold on to it. You want to talk about that, and then we'll move on?
Right. So let me start there, and then I'll say a little bit about Edison and deafness and sound recording. So the motion picture. So Edison had a couple of key patents, especially on motion picture cameras. And there were a number of other patents that were key patents. And in 1908, Edison's attorney, the head of his legal department, came up with this brilliant idea to control the movie industry by combining all of the interests, all the companies that had key patents. So they created the Motion Picture Patents Company, included George Eastman because he produced the film that was used, and it included a bunch of other movie companies that had key patents. They were trying to use the patent system to control the movie industry. It ended up not being very successful. You know, there's this mythology that the reason that Hollywood was created was to get away from the patent trust. But in fact, the movie industry in those very years, 1908 to 1915, when the antitrust suit disbanded the company, the center of the movie industry was actually Fort Lee, New Jersey, right near Edison. So that wasn't why Hollywood was created. Hollywood was created because, having come from California, the skies are not cloudy all day. You can get to just about any sort of scenery, from ocean to desert to mountain, and land was cheap at that time. That's why Hollywood was created. But this effort to use the patent system, right, to control an industry, and they weren't the only ones. In fact, Edison even wrote there's a notebook that Edison wrote out his ideas about the way in which the Sherman Antitrust Act, he was very concerned about, how it might affect patents and the use of patents as a strategy in business. And so one of the things that in fact happened was that the Antitrust Act did not in fact prevent patents from being used by companies to strengthen their position in the industry, but there were ways in which the government, in the case of the Motion Picture Patents Company, was able to break up that combination because of the way they were using the patents to prevent other people from coming into the industry. But GE and Westinghouse actually formed what they call the Board of Patent Control. Once GE was formed, when the Edison company was merged with another company to form GE, Westinghouse was the other main competitor. And they decided to just cross-license each other, and then they would sue everybody else out of existence. So they became the dominant companies because they used the patent system. So this is one of the key things about the way in patent, which corporations, because they're not individuals, they can control a bunch of patents that can control an industry, right? So getting back to Edison and deafness, so he grew progressively deafer. When he was working originally on telephones and sound recording, they actually used his ability to hear as kind of an instrument as to how good the sound was. And then later on in his life, especially in the 19-teens, he was increasingly deaf, very hard of hearing, and he would bite on the soundboard of pianos or of phonographs in order to have the sound conducted through the bones into the ear so he could hear. But it was also a time when he was trying to control what the artists were that would be recorded by his company. He felt he heard more purely that way. And so he had his own ideas about who were the best people to record music. And he didn't want the people who were, the Carusos who were great performers. He wanted the people who sounded best on recordings.
He was such a perfectionist. Okay, yeah. I'm gonna step in right there.
Go ahead.
Let Tova ask. Tova love, Kaplan, what's your question?
Right, so thank you. This was so interesting to hear about such a powerful person in American history. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about America's general approach to invention and how that compares to other countries. And
Sure.
Do you think that Thomas Edison could have had the impact and the lasting legacy that he had if he had, done his work in another country with a different approach to the patent and invention system?
Right. Well, I think that's actually a very good question. I actually opened my biography by talking about the fact that Edison's family came from Canada, and if he had been born in Canada and grown up and worked in Canada, he might not have been as successful. So there are a couple of things, obviously. So part of it is the American patent system, unlike all the others, was designed to be very democratic. It was much lower cost. I mean, it still costs something to take out a patent, but it was much easier to do. And many more Americans patented than was true of the common people in other countries in Europe or Canada or Australia. So there's a way in which the patent system was very democratic. It was also that this country, I think, had a much greater willingness to be risk takers, right? And so that's part of it. It was a growing industrial country, and so I think that offered a lot of opportunity that was maybe not as great in other more settled countries. And so I think the democratic nature of the patent system, the sort of risk-taking nature of American society, I think one of the things about immigrants who come to the United States is they're all risk takers. That's why they left wherever they were, right? And I think that's a really important quality that Americans have, is this kind of risk-taking aspect. And I think that combines really well with the notion of, sort of seeing if we can't do things a different way than they've been done before. And so I think there are a lot of ways in which that's very much a part of the American character. That's why this idea of Yankee ingenuity arose, right? It's why when Edison went to Europe in 1889, he went to the Paris Exposition that year. He was followed around everywhere he went. He was celebrated. And there was a sense in which he represented something kind of fundamental about America, right? And so I think that is very much the case, that Edison kind of represented that idea of, American ingenuity, this risk-taking, this sort of, let's try something new and different.
Okay, Dakare Chatman, it is your question.
Dr. Isreal, my question is, I'm a licensed tour guide here in Charleston, and at a house here, I'm a docent. Well, this house is very old, and it was owned by basically the richest people, one of the richest families here in Charleston. And as I was a docent there, they let you pick out things that you want to talk about. And they have original Edison light bulbs in this house. Well, we were looking at them one day with one of the museum people, and there's it has Edison's little trademark on it. But then at the bottom of the light bulb, we saw an L, and we never knew what that L was for. And apparently, I don't know if you know about this, but there's this African American named Lewis Latimer that helped him come up with this. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, I do know a lot about Latimer. Unfortunately, that's not what the L stands for.
It's not.
No, it isn't. So Lewis Latimer is a really amazing figure in American history. His father had been a slave. He was born a free person in Massachusetts. He actually was working as a draftsman in the patent attorney's office when Alexander Graham Bell came in with his telephone, and he actually drew those patent drawings. He later went on to work in the electrical industry. He worked originally for the Maxim company, which is a competitor to Edison. Maxim, one of the things he did was he helped to improve the Maxim lamp production technology. And he has some patents on Maxim lamps and Maxim production technology. And he actually was sent to England to set up the Maxim lamp factory there. Then he came back, he worked for a couple of other companies, and then he joined the Edison company as one of the people in their patent office to help them prepare patent infringement cases. So the L doesn't stand for Latimer on the Edison bulb. I'm not quite sure what that L means. Actually, there are people who are experts on all the changes in different light bulbs, but I know it's not Latimer. But nonetheless, Latimer is a really important figure in sort of the African Americans who were involved in technology and invention and patenting in the 19th century.
Do you know, I want to go to Cathy next, and if someone has a question, but let's talk about the light bulb for just a minute, right? What exactly was his contribution to the light bulb for people, so we can really, really understand this? The movie moved so quickly, and it was just really, really fast, and I had to watch it twice actually, because but the light bulb, from what I was reading, it was the continuity of time that the light would stay on in the bulb. Was this not one of the things that he's famous for with the light bulb? In other words, how much of the light bulb was already there, and then what did he contribute to it to bring us light, the man of light?
So as I said, there were about 40 years of people working on electric light bulbs. They all used the same basic materials that Edison experimented with. either patents with high melting points, so they didn't need to be in a vacuum, or carbon, which did need to be in, so basically carbonized paper, cardboard, things like that. You just raise it, put it in a furnace so that it drove off everything except for the carbon element of it. The problem is the vacuum technologies of the day weren't sufficient for a carbon lamp, and keeping the metals from melting when they reached the melting point was very difficult. The other problem was that if you're going to have a system of electricity distributed throughout a city, you needed to find a way to reduce the amount of copper conductors that you were using. Well, Edison figured out, number one, you could reduce the copper conductors by actually raising the resistance of the lamp, that is the resistance to the current. When the electrons are kind of going through the filament, you know, they're kind of resisting each other, right? And so you raise the resistance. That's kind of a simple way of thinking about it. And you can actually reduce the amount of copper that you need. Then you have to protect the filament. Edison started with platinum, but he discovered that the platinum kept melting too early. He had a way of switching the power on and off using kind of telegraph relays. So he decided, let me put it in a vacuum and see what happens. And he discovered that, in fact, it was giving off gases. There were gases in the metal, hydrogen and oxygen. And so he figured out a way to make the platinum stronger by driving off the gases and enclosing in a vacuum. Once he had the vacuum, he realized platinum is really expensive. I can try carbon again. And then once he goes to carbon, he realizes, number one, carbon already has a naturally high resistance, which the platinum didn't, and it's a lot cheaper. And so it was a question then of finding the best form of carbon. And he figured that grasses with long contiguous fibers, and the thing they settled on was bamboo. So Edison carbon filament lamps have very thin filaments of bamboo enclosed in a vacuum. And it's that thin filament of high resistance in a vacuum that was the basis for the Edison patent. And one of the things that happened was that he was able to make it last for a much longer time than all the electric lights that had come before.
Yeah, wasn't it like 12, how many hours was it they were celebrating in the lab?
The original experiment lasted about 14.5 hours, and then the glass broke, the original carbon filament experiment. Eventually they got up to 2,000, 2,500 hours. With the,
wow.
Yeah.
So, and weren't there 1,000 experiments? What's the whole 1,000?
So there were lots of experiments. There were not 1,000 different materials, which is usually what people say. There were lots of experiments. And the experiments continued even after they had a basic lamp, because they still had to figure out how to make it last longer, how to manufacture it, how to cheapen the manufacture. So they continued to conduct experiments even after they went into commercial production of the lamps, right? So, yeah.
And he rarely slept. I mean, he was very tactile genius, you know, with all of his, you know, and what I was reading is he wasn't really, you know, mathematical like, you know, the Einsteins of the world, but he was tactile, and he'd bring all these experiments and he would just go and go and go. He had this ability to just focus for 12, 14, you know, 18 hours. And his wife would have to come say, you know, look, go take a bath, let's go to sleep. Okay, Cathy, your question.
Well, thank you, Dr. Isreal, for being here. This is just a fascinating program, and we got so many great questions here in the queue. And one, I saw a lot of Edison's famous quotes about continuing to try even when you fail. Mm-hmm. And Layla Sunderman asked, how many patents did Edison apply for versus how many were actually granted? Because I think you said he had like 1,200 granted, but do you have any idea how many he actually applied for?
Yeah, so we don't yet have a full count of all of those. As we've been developing or producing our book edition, we've been trying in each volume to actually give a count of all the patents that he applied for at any time period. And he applied for many more patents than he actually received. So he, we don't really have a full count, but I would guess that, he probably applied for somewhere in the neighborhood altogether of US patents, probably around 1,500 or so, just guessing based on what we know, and was successful in, 1,093. And as I said, he also had lots of European patents as well. Most of the European countries were not, so another difference between the American system and the European systems, most European systems, you just filed the patent. They had different requirements. France, you had to actually work the patent in the country. England, you just had to file it. In the US, there was actually an examination system. And so there were rejected patents, which was not true elsewhere.
And then Rick Sutherland asked a question about, I think he says in a book called Internal Combustion, Edison explored electric cars, but his labs were mysteriously burned down. And he was wondering why, why Edison.
Okay, so yes, Edison did work on electric automobiles. He was actually working on to develop the battery. And he spent about a decade developing a very efficient and lighter electric battery than was used in electric automobiles at the time. But two things, right? The development of mass production by Henry Ford, and then World War I, where, having trucks and Jeeps and so forth for supplying the army, you didn't have electricity. So electric wasn't going to work. And so companies turned away from electric and focused on gas engines. The factory fire was not mysterious. We know exactly what caused it: motion pictures. So early motion pictures were nitrocellulose-based film, and nitrocellulose is gunpowder, essentially, or gun cotton. It's used in making explosives. So the early films were actually very flammable, and that's what actually caused the fire. And so it actually destroyed the manufacturing complex, but not the lab buildings.
Okay.
Okay, so I want to try to do another round here with Tova, Dakare, and Cathy. But can you tell our listeners here, tell us the everyday things that we touch and use in our lives. Give us an appreciation of his genius. People just think light bulb. But if you could do a rundown of 10, 20, 30 things that we deal with in our life every day where he had the patent or the influence.
Well, I mean, Edison obviously was involved in a lot of industries and made really substantial contributions to them. A lot of the things that he invented, we have similar things that descended from them. The light bulb that we're using is, no longer incandescent for the most part, because incandescents produce more heat than light. They're very inefficient. So we've gone to other, especially LEDs and fluorescents. But the electric light system is fundamentally Edison's, except for the alternating current distribution system. But all the other aspects of the system are essentially fundamentally what Edison devised. The telephones we use now are all digital. So we're not using the Edison carbon button transmitter, but before we went digital, all the phones basically had an Edison style transmitter in them. We don't generally have play phonograph records anymore. Everything's digital. But if you stop and think about it, we have sound recording as a daily experience because Edison invented the phonograph 150 years ago, right? The motion pictures, he was not the only person working on that technology. But his camera was the first. He was the first to commercialize the technology. So obviously having motion pictures is something we take for granted once again, right? That's part of it. He also worked on improvements in the manufacture of Edison Portland cement. In the first 2 decades of the 20th century, Portland cement became a primary building material throughout the United States and in other countries. The Panama Canal, Edison's improvements in cement manufacture were really crucial. The original Yankee Stadium was Edison Portland cement. It doesn't exist anymore, but that building for a long time, represented Edison's contributions to the cement industry. Edison came up with ways of processing low-grade iron ore that became commercially unviable when vast new fields of iron ore were discovered in the Midwest. But the kind of processes he developed are actually still used today for low-grade iron ore, with obviously some modern improvements. So there are all sorts of ways in which we don't even think about Edison being connected to it, that we're still sort of drawing on technologies that he was very deeply committed to and involved in developing. And today, the way we're trying to solve the problem of the electric automobile is drawing very directly on the same things Edison was doing 100 years ago.
The battery that we put, didn't it have something to do with the battery? Just the regular battery?
So the Edison storage battery that was developed for electric automobiles was the first alkaline battery, right? It wasn't a dry cell, which is what we put in all of our devices today. But the same kind of chemical properties were being developed by Edison early on, and then other people developed the dry cell batteries. He also developed a very efficient, what's known as a primary battery, which is a wet cell battery that was used throughout industry. It's not used anymore. We don't generally use wet cell batteries, but it was a very extensively used one. So he influenced the development of battery technology very
and it was the dictaphone where he wanted to record people's voices.
So that's the Ediphone in Edison's world, not the dictaphone. The dictaphone was a competitor. So the phonograph, the first market for phonographs was actually dictation. But it took a long time to actually develop a phonograph that worked really well as a dictating machine that could be used very easily in offices. And so actually the development of the phonograph as an entertainment device actually was more successful commercially. And it was only after that that the Ediphone and the dictaphone and other competitors actually emerged in the first part of the 20th century.
Fascinating. Okay, I'm going to try to do a quick round here. I watched a show that talked about a lightning round. So we'll do lightning with lightning answers so I can get to Tova, Dakare, and Cathy one more time. So lightning round. Tova, love Kaplan.
All right, so I guess I'll make this short. What are some of the personal qualities that Thomas Edison possessed that allowed him to become such an enduring figure in American history? And what can we, the new generation of American inventors, learn from those qualities and put them in our daily lives?
Okay, good question. So the first thing I would say about that is that one of Edison's greatest qualities was that he understood the value of failing. Failing for Edison was a learning process. He failed lots of times, right? But he never treated it as something that was unsuccessful because he failed. It was just another part of the learning process in the development of a technology, right? So I think that's really important. We're so afraid of failing, right? But it's a really important part of the learning process. And so I think that's one of the things I would most emphasize. Edison also had a lot of self-confidence, and that always helps. He had a mind that was very good at thinking about analogies between different technologies. And so seeing how something that was being developed over here or that existed over here might be useful if we do something over here with it. And I think that's really important too, to sort of see the association between things that we don't normally see, right? That's one of the things that makes invention, is being able to see something new, even in things that already exist. And so I think that's another important quality. And I think stick-to-itiveness is something that Edison always said was really important, right? And his most famous quote, 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration. You can have an idea, but if you don't work hard to realize it, you're not going to succeed.
That's great. That's really great. Okay. Dakare Chatman.
Hello. Okay, so here's the actor in me. Here's your lightning round question. Do you think that the current war is an accurate depiction of Edison and his life? And do you think that Cumberbatch did a good job playing him?
So I like Cumberbatch as an actor, and I think there were elements of Edison that he caught pretty well. I think the bigger problem was that this was a script that didn't entirely understand Edison, didn't understand what he did, and in terms of both his life and what he accomplished, didn't really kind of capture Edison, right? There are a lot of historical inaccuracies. Part of that is that's movie making, right? But I think there are ways in which they kind of missed key things. So to give you an example, right? George Westinghouse is always shown in his factories. Edison is shown in this sort of rudimentary laboratory, right? Edison had immense factories. And in fact, a lot of the R&D work was being done in the factories, right? But you would never know that from this movie, that Edison was very modern, right? Westinghouse seems the more modern person in the current war, for example. So I think there are a lot of ways in which it just didn't really capture Edison's, the way he worked or what he accomplished.
And another thing, I'm sorry, this is lightning round.
Yeah, go ahead. Was
it really that tense between those two?
Yes. Edison. So one of the qualities that Edison brought to being an inventor, Edison believed in having enemies, that is, rivals. And so he actually, there were a number of times, instances where Edison actually provoked a rivalry in a sense. And with Westinghouse, that was very much the case. I think Westinghouse would have been much happier to kind of collaborate, and Edison wanted nothing to do with that. Right? It was Edison's way or the highway. And so I think there was a lot of tension between them, and a lot of it was created by Edison.
You know, I just think there was so much from pictures I've seen. There was so much sparkle. You know, a little smile, a little sparkle with Thomas Edison, that I think we lost that in the kind of flurry of activity that Benedict Cumberbatch in the direction of the piece. You missed that element. And also from a showbiz standpoint, I think they wanted to focus on the actual current war, but in the process, you lost the whole. It became sort of like Edison was this. How can I say this, right? It pictured Edison as sort of not the magnificent figure that he really was, because Westinghouse seemed to win. You know, he won the whole Chicago's, whatever it was, to State Fair. So I think it diminished Edison a little bit, whereas Edison was just so incredibly brilliant.
Well, but, Edison did ultimately lose the current war, right? AC won out, both in Chicago and in the larger distribution system. Although the other elements of the system are very much the thing that Edison developed. But that idea of the sparkle and the spark. So one of the things that's fascinating about Edison is that he didn't like public speaking, but he loved talking to reporters and to people in a one-on-one situation in particular. He was a great storyteller and a bit of bon vivant in that respect. And so I think the way he was depicted in the media of the day, the newspapers, you really get a sense of him from that's much more sort of both down to earth and lively and joking and storytelling than was the case in the current war.
And he was such a hero. I mean, people followed him around the way they did Washington. You know, they were just absolutely, I mean, think about how he changed the world with the light bulb. Before it was candles. You know, it was
candles and gas and kerosene, but everything had a fire, right? And everything could burn, right? That was dangerous to use light.
Yeah.
One of the things that he made.
And then suddenly, but it's really fascinating. Okay, do we have time for one more closing question?
Sure, absolutely.
Dr. This has been so much fun. I just love this whole chat here. I think that you're brilliant and wonderful and entertaining, and I love hearing Tova Dakare's unique and individual perspectives and brilliant questions that they bring, and Cathy, yours too. So this is a lot of fun. Okay, so Cathy, our closing question.
Yes, and we've got a couple of just really, I think, would be quick questions to answer. James Klinger asks, in Edison's patent litigation, was he usually the plaintiff or usually the defendant?
That's a good question. So most of the time, Edison was the complainant. This was especially true in the electrical industry. In fact, he wanted to launch more lawsuits than his company actually wanted to battle. But Edison really felt that it was important to protect his patents in court, and actually grew a little frustrated with the fact that he was constantly in court having to defend his patents. But he saw that as a crucial part of the patent process.
And then just to close it out, Isabel Cruz asks, who surpassed Edison's number of patents at the beginning of the 21st century? Do we know?
Yes. I'm not going to remember the names off the top of my head. Actually, you can go to Wikipedia and look it up.
Okay.
One of them is a Japanese inventor. Another is, I believe, an American inventor. So if you go to Wikipedia, you can look it up.
Okay.
Who has the most patents?
Great, thank you.
Did he succeed in creating a plant-based rubber? Because I know they were trying with the tires and whatnot at the end of his life. Did he succeed with the rubber plant? Or he did come up with a plant. Don't tell me what the plant was. Let me see if I can remember it.
So he tried developing some tires out of a one strain of goldenrod.
That's it.
They made one set, but it never really succeeded commercially. And then, he got sick and died. They continued the project for a little while. And then during World War II, the new chemistry that had been evolving in the 1920s and 30s led to the development of synthetic rubber using petroleum byproducts, right? Much like plastics. And so that's the evolution of the chemical industry, is from natural materials like Edison was working on in his lifetime to plastics coming out of the petroleum industry.
Well, it was fun to hear you talk about how he loved to talk to the press. He was a little bit of a Will Rogers, wasn't he?
Yeah, there was a little bit of that in him. Yep.
Yeah, a little bit of Will Rogers. Okay, I guess we have to stop. It's just so, Jeanette, do you have a quick question, Jeanette? Lightning round?
No questions. I just want to say one of my favorite quotes of Edison's was, show me a man that's content and I'll show you a man who's a failure. I just loved his competitive spirit.
Yeah, he was definitely had a competitive spirit.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Dr. Isreal.
My
What
pleasure.
a treat. It was really special. Thank you for everyone joining us tonight. Oh, and thank you to Dakare and Tova and Lisa and Jeanette and Cathy. Dr. Isreal, I hope you'll come back, because this was just a lot of fun. And
I'd be delighted to come back. This was lots of fun.
And I'll give a shout out to James Klinger too, because James Klinger is been one of our brilliant guests, and we expect to have him back on our show very shortly as well. He was on a couple weeks ago talking about the Morse code. So hello, James Klinger. We look forward to seeing you on the show as well. But again, Dr. Isreal, thank you. And when I get to New York City, I'm going to look you up and we'll have a cup of coffee.
Absolutely, love to do it.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your time, and glad you joined us. Have a great night. Thank you, Dr. Isreal. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yep.